Good afternoon. This is Integrity Stew, a periodic inquiry into the breakdown of trust in our culture. And today we're fortunate enough to have John Davis, a naturalist, conservationist, author, and the executive director of the Rewilding Institute. Now, John, we were talking a few days ago about All Things Considered, the famous NPR program, and you took issue with the naming of that program in such a manner. Could you tell us why?
Yeah, and why I raised that subject a week or so ago, Stu, is I really like these questions you've asked in your book and in your blog about sort of ways of gauging people's integrity on small things, your law of small things. So if we listen to National Public Radio, do we contribute to public radio? And I admitted to you, I don't. And I gave you my rationale, which is perhaps weak, but at least I think raises an important point. The name of their flagship show, All Things Considered, to my mind, is disingenuous or misleading anyway. They don't consider all things. National Public Radio does a good job of considering many human issues. They do a good job of representing underrepresented people in terms of news coverage. They, especially these days, are giving a lot of attention to people who are of other sexes or other genders or mixed, or they're giving a lot of attention to that, and that's good. They deserve credit for drawing attention to race and ethnicity and sexuality issues, but they give very little attention to the natural world. And when they do, it's usually couched in human terms. So if there's a story about climate chaos, which is a better term for it than climate change, it's usually about the effects on the human world of climate change. Once in a while they'll give a story on wildlife, but very rarely. So my point is, the name of their show is All Things Considered. Well, there are probably at least 10 million, maybe 100 million species of wildlife on Earth. There's one species of human, and All Things Considered devotes 99% of its time, at least, to that one species. Why don't they give equal attention? No, of course not equal, but why don't they give at least some attention to those tens of millions of other species? So what I'm thinking of doing with your encouragement, actually, is next year giving to public radio, as I should, because I listen to it, is the best source of news out there, but calling them and explaining, I'm giving you $10, and that's what I'm going to keep doing until you actually start covering the wider natural world, until you start giving attention to those other millions of species on All Things Considered. I'm going to tell you, you're not considering all things, and so I'm going to give you a small pledge each year, because I do listen to your show, but until you start giving attention to the other species at least a little bit more than you do now, I'm not going to give you an appreciable donation.
I think that's a fascinating way to resolve the integrity issue, and thank you so much for joining us on Integrity Stew.
Thank you, Stu, and I really appreciate your insights that sort of gave me that idea. Give something, but make the point as you do so as to why you're giving a very small amount and not more. So.
And you said you were going to make the point to them in a written explanation.
Yes. I think I actually will probably try to both call and write. Call in make the pledge, explain to the person on the phone, this is why I'm giving $10, and then also send them a letter. And maybe basically say, if you'll start giving more attention to the natural world, I'll do my best to come up with at least $100 a year.
And would you tell our viewers how they get in touch with you?
Yes.
If they want to comment on your approach?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Stu, for giving us attention. I am, as Stu said, I'm the executive director of the Rewilding Institute, and I am editor of our online publication, Rewilding Earth. Both are easy to find at rewilding.org, and we're trying to get a good conversation going on how to not just conserve the natural world, but actually actively restore it, which is going to involve a lot of human work, of course. So thanks again for your time, Stu.
That's great. And we have a minute. Would you care to tell us about this place? We're looking at this magnificent view, where we are, and a little about your cabin that you constructed.
Well, I wish I had constructed. I did not build this cabin. It's my home and my sanctuary and my study, but I did not build it. Actually, I bought the land in 1994. We are in a place I call Hemlock Rock Wildlife Sanctuary, which is in the heart of a wildlife corridor conservationists around here know as Split Rock Wildway, linking Lake Champlain through the West Champlain Hills to the high peaks of Adirondack Park. It's a critical wildlife corridor. I'm sort of in the middle of it. I bought this land to protect it and then donated a conservation easement, a very strong conservation easement, in fact a forever wild conservation easement to the Northeast Wilderness Trust. So really I share stewardship responsibilities here with the Northeast Wilderness Trust, and you and I like to gather here for coffee or beer now and then to just exchange ideas, and it's a nice place to have lofty thoughts, because we're in the middle of nature. We're hearing spring peepers in the background, and in the morning we of course hear many songbirds, thrushes, and other songbirds. So it's a good place to think. It's a good place to work.
And the perpetual rain of
Yeah,
the
we of
North
course came
Country
there,
in
yes.
spring. And tell us about your book on the Split Rock Wild Way.
Yeah, with a mutual friend of ours, George Davis, and his assistant, Katie Shepard, and a lot of encouragement and editing expertise from them, I put together a book, or actually I wrote a series of blogs, and then they put them together into a book about wildlife of Split Rock Wild Way, wildlife of the larger Adirondack Park as well, but
Yes.
particularly wildlife of Split Rock Wild Way. And the name of the book is Split Rock Wild Way, Scouting the Adirondack Park's Most Diverse Wildlife Corridor, and it was published by Essex Editions.
It was a great book. I
Thank
so enjoyed that book. Tell us about the Puma. You're an advocate
Yes,
for
yes.
reintroducing the Puma, also known as the mountain lion or cougar.
Absolutely.
And tell us about how that's going.
Yeah, I like to say the Adirondack Park is the wildest place in the East, and it's not yet wild enough. This is at least arguably the wildest, most intact landscape in the eastern United States. But we are missing at least two critical species. We're missing the top carnivores, Puma and gray wolf, or cougar and timber wolf. They go by different names. But they are critical to ecological health. They help maintain the balance between herbivores like white-tailed deer and turkeys and grouse, and the forest around them, and the plant community around. Right now, we don't have the top predators, and so we have, in some places, overbrowsing. And not so much here in the Adirondack Park, where we still have cold winters that tend to knock back deer numbers somewhat, but even here, eventually, as the climate warms, and to our south, much more already, deer overbrowsing is a serious problem. And some scientists are warning, if we don't bring back the natural predators, Puma and wolf, we will see our hardwood forests almost literally browse to the ground. We just won't see hardwood trees regenerating. The deer will eat most of the
I see.
So I'm a strong advocate for reintroducing pumas and wolves. I would suggest we start with pumas. They're a little less controversial, and there's plenty of prey for them here. There's plenty of good habitat. It's a matter of encouraging coexistence. It's a matter of convincing people to welcome them home. And then we probably would need to actively restore them, because their nearest populations are a long way from here, in South Florida and in the Black Hills of South Dakota. And generally with pumas and many other cats, when there is an individual that makes a heroic long journey to find a new territory, it's usually a male. And so the tragic story that repeats is young males light out for the territory. Young male pumas light out for the territory, looking for mates, looking for female pumas, and they don't find them. And so eventually they are shot or killed by cars. So you hear many reports of cougar or mountain lion or puma sightings in this region. Some of them are real. Some of them are probably imagined, or might be bobcats or golden retrievers or deer that were misleading in dim light. But there are genuine sightings, and those likely are usually young males looking for mates, and sadly they won't find them.
Oh. One of the points you make in the book that was very surprising and very relevant is that a puma can actually contribute to tick control.
Yes.
You're reaching an epidemic in
That's right.
Lyme disease and other tick-borne pathogens. Could you explain
Yeah,
how that works?
you and I have both had tick-borne ailments, and
Yes.
both been very, very sick
Yeah.
from those, and we were both lucky to get them knocked out by antibiotics. But it's almost an epidemic around here. Lyme disease, and now there are 4 or 5 other diseases that deer ticks carry, and they're all pretty nasty, and you have to use some pretty heavy antibiotics to get rid of them. And if you don't get rid of them quickly, you could be stuck with them. And it's not an exact correlation, but generally speaking, what the science is suggesting is ticks tend to proliferate in fragmented ecosystems that have lost some or many of their native carnivores. If we were to restore pumas and wolves, we would see deer numbers held in check. There would still be plenty of deer, but they would not be overly abundant.
Let's see.
And we'd also have predators that tend to control coyote numbers. Now, I welcome coyotes as native carnivores now that they've moved into our area, that are doing a good job of controlling some smaller species, but they're not as effective at hunting rodents as red foxes are. So if you want to have fewer deer mice and other carriers of the ticks that give us Lyme disease, and deer are important in this chain of events, but the rodents are even more important. If you want predators that are very effective at controlling rodents, red foxes are the best. Coyotes do eat rodents, but not as many as red foxes do, and coyotes tend to outcompete or displace red foxes. So, if you have coyotes but not wolves, red fox populations drop. If you have red foxes, coyotes, and wolves keep things in balance, because wolves outcompete or displace coyotes, but they're not so interested in bothering red foxes, and so red fox numbers rebound. And red foxes are the best hunters of rodents. So ideally, we would have pumas and wolves around here, and then we'd have smaller numbers of deer, and they'd be moving more. They wouldn't be loafing and getting infested with ticks so much. We'd have smaller numbers of the rodents that carry the Lyme disease bearing ticks. We'd have all these animals still, but they wouldn't be overly abundant. Things would be in more balance.
Well, this is great. You've been going around the country, not just here, but out west as well, bringing this message of the economic balance that we are, as humans, are responsible for assisting.
Right.
And people can go to your website and check that out, Rewilding Institute. Tell us what your plans are to continue this work and what your next projects might be.
Well, we're putting out articles weekly on Rewilding Earth, which is rewilding.org. We're putting together our first annual print anthology. Many of us don't really like to read online, so for those of us who prefer to read good old-fashioned books, we're putting out a book of our best articles from 2018, and we hope to do that year after year.
Good for you.
So people who don't want to read on the screen, and I don't blame you, I'm with you, you can read the book. And our on-the-ground projects include promoting puma recovery in the Northeast. We will also be promoting wolf recovery, although we tend to think that the puma is the one to start with first, again, because they're a little less controversial, and it wouldn't take that many individuals to get a population going. We're also interested in promoting the idea of exploring where American chestnuts might be restored. That was a keystone tree in much of the eastern deciduous forest. It was knocked out by an exotic pathogen, but scientists have been working for decades now to develop disease-resistant American chestnut trees, and they're making real progress. So here in Split Rock Wildway, we were probably right at the northern edge of their range, but with warming climate, we will become probably quite a good area for American chestnuts. So we're hoping we can work with the American Chestnut Foundation and find some locations where old fields, typically on conserved lands, old farm fields that are being allowed to go back to forest, and try planting some American chestnut trees, and maybe also some of the southerly oaks that just get into the Champlain Valley in anticipation of the climate being warmer, so that animals will have plenty of forage. We're also very actively promoting Mexican wolf recovery in the Southwest. That's another of our key campaigns.
Yes.
And you met Dave Parsons, the great biologist who spearheads that program for us. So that's one of our key areas, is Southwest, promoting the Mogollon Wildway, linking Gila Wilderness with Grand Canyon National Park, and restoring Mexican wolves.
And
there.
Dave has been at this for 30 years, as you have been.
That's right.
And it takes a person who's committed to this work to stay with it. And even with all that work, he's restored how many? 60?
They're about 120 on the ground
Okay.
now.
That's
And
great.
he was the biologist who first released them, working with Bruce Babbitt, Secretary of the Interior Bruce Babbitt. And you know, the Fish and Wildlife Service, under administrations such as the present one, is not necessarily very good for wildlife. Under better administrations, they're better. There are some excellent biologists at Fish and Wildlife Service, but there are also, especially under an administration like we have at present, some who really are not that much interested in restoring carnivores. So these days, Dave Parsons works with us, the Rewilding Institute, and he serves as a watchdog, an advocate, an educator, making sure that the Fish and Wildlife Service is doing what it's supposed to do. They are supposed to be protected under the Endangered Species Act, but sometimes non-profit conservation groups like ours, the Rewilding Institute, have to force the agencies to do the right thing.
Well, speaking on that note, doing the right thing, this is Integrity Stew. I've had the pleasure of interviewing John Davis, a noted conservationist, naturalist, author, and activist.
Yes.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, Stu.
It's a pleasure.
And I love your book. Everybody should, if you haven't read Stu's book, read it.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
It's fun.
You may not agree with John. All things considered is, after all, just a tagline, a calling card, a device to get people thinking about something, a marketing ploy, to put it bluntly. But can it ever be just that? What John is asking us to do is to look beyond the surface, the way we defer to someone's self-characterization. Is there real conviction behind those words? Is there accurate meaning and authenticity? You see, John has devoted his life to maintaining the soundness and balance of the world around us and the creatures inhabiting it. So whatever we think of his point of view, it is worthy of consideration because it is rooted in a lifelong commitment to something we can all agree is critical to our well-being: environmental balance. So what's the law of small things? Be wary of cliches, catchphrases, for there may be hidden in those a deception,